Now, some stories about Cromwell around this date are so wild that even as an ingenious novelist, I found it quite impossible to smooth them into my own narrative. And they include the story of how he made jelly for the Pope, as told by John Fox, the martyrologist. Of course, to Fox, Cromwell was a Protestant martyr, but in Acts and Monuments, he doesn't always approach his biography with the gravity that one would expect. Fox tells us that in 1510, the members of a pious guild in Boston in Lincolnshire, which was Fox's hometown, needed to apply to the Pope, Julius II, for the renewal of 2 pardons. Pardons were privileges or exemptions. They were things like dispensation from Lenten austerities, or permissions for special masses to be said, grants of indulgences. So Boston sent a delegate over to the continent, not without considerable worry about whether they were going to get these pardons and the cost of them. And stopping in Antwerp, according to Fox, their delegate conferred and persuaded with T. Cromwell to contriving thereof. Cromwell, though perceiving the enterprise to be of no small difficulty to traverse the Pope's court, for the unreasonable expenses among those greedy cormorants, yet, having some skill of the Italian tongue, was at length persuaded and content to give the adventure, and so took his journey towards Rome. Cromwell, perceiving that the Pope's greedy humour must needs be served with some present or other, began to cast with himself what thing best to devise, wherein he might best serve the Pope's devotion. I'd love to have seen the faces of his co-delegates when he came up with jelly. Anyway, Fox goes on. At length, having knowledge how the Pope's holy tooth greatly delighted to newfangled strange delicates and dainty dishes, it came in his mind to prepare certain fine dishes of jelly, after the best fashion, made after our country manner here in England, which to them of Rome was not known or seen before. This done, Cromwell observing his time accordingly, as the Pope was newly come from hunting into his pavilion, he with his companions approached with his English presence, brought in with a 3-man song, as we call it, in the English tongue and after the English fashion. The Pope, suddenly marvelling at the strangeness of the song, and understanding that they were Englishmen, and came not empty-handed, willed them to be called in, Cromwell there showing his obedience and offering his jolly junkets, such as kings and princes only, said he, in the realm of England used to feed upon, and desired the same to be accepted in benevolent part. Pope Julius, seeing the strangeness of the dishes, commanded by and by his cardinal to take the assay, who, in tasting thereof, liked it so well, and so likewise the Pope after him, that knowing of them what their suits were, and requiring them to make known the making of that meat, he, incontinent, without any ado, stamped both their pardons, the greater as well as the lesser. In other words, you give me the recipe and you can have 40 years off purgatory. In his late 20s, Cromwell came back to London. He took to the law and joined Gray's Inn. And at this point, he went to work for Cardinal Wolsey, who was Lord Chancellor, Papal Legate, Archbishop of York, the great power in England next to the King. Cromwell was a member of Parliament in 1523, and he made a notable opposition speech, telling Henry not to go to war. I should say any opposition speech was notable in those days. His speech Lynch told Henry not to go to war with France because he couldn't afford it. Henry, of course, didn't think his martial prowess should be costed out like this. But Cromwell told him that war would use up all the bullion in the country, and that if the king were taken prisoner, we'd be reduced to offering ransom money by way of leather tokens. And how, we asked, will the French like that? In his last campaign, Henry had taken the town of Terouanne, a feat of which he was very proud. But Cromwell referred to this prize as a dog hole. There may have been a double agenda here. Cromwell's speech was just unctuous and flattery-laden enough to make sure he wasn't arrested immediately. And there was usually a double agenda with Cromwell. It's possible that Wolsey had put him up to this, partly because of his well-known humanist and pacifist credentials, but also because if there was going to be a war, the cardinal had to raise the taxes for it. So it was very much in the cardinal's interest to get people to the treaty table rather than on the battlefield. After this parliament had risen, Cromwell wrote a letter about it to a friend. I, amongst others, have endured a parliament which lasted 17 whole weeks, where we communed of war, peace, strife, contention, debates, murmur, grudges, riches, poverty, penury, truth, falsehood, justice, equity, deceit, oppression, treason, murder, felony, conciliation, and also how a commonwealth might be edified and continued within this our realm. How date in conclusion, we've done as our predecessors have been wont to do, that is to say, as well as we might, and left off where we began. That's Cromwell's style, a flight of rhetoric pulled to earth suddenly by a piece of sardonic realism. It seems as if, before he exercised any power, he knew how it would be. As a good Italian, he would have known that Leonardo never did succeed in making the flying machine. Change is difficult. Ideals will crash and burn. People will only accept change, he said, if it puts them in better ease. And he was patient enough to know that reform is often a step forward and a step back. But he was committed to change, unlike many of his contemporaries, who thought that God had ordained the world as it is and that no one should disturb the good order. After Wolsey's fall, Cromwell passed into Henry's service. And what interested Henry, apart from Cromwell's demonstrated ability, was his loyalty, because he had stuck by Cardinal Wolsey at his fall when the rest of the world had deserted him. Henry thought loyalty a thing admirable in itself. Of course, it was in his interest to think that. Cromwell joined the council and things began to happen. Henry had got his policy into an intractable knot over the annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. Cromwell began to cut through the knot. Henry became head of the Church of England, pronounced his own divorce.